Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to be talking about alopecia areata, which is a patchy autoimmune hair loss, and the connection between that condition and other additional autoimmune conditions that you might have. So let's get into that. All right, so just to start, alopecia areata, of course, I have another big video on this that kind of explains the basics, but I'll give it to you in 10 seconds. Alopecia areata is patchy hair loss, usually the face and scalp, that is autoimmune. Now, the course of it and the severity can vary widely, but it can progress to a type of alopecia called totalis or universalis, where essentially you lose all your hair. And a new study has looked at the connection between that condition and your odds of having other conditions, what we call comorbidities. And I'll explain why we're even talking about this. So they looked at essentially, looking at all these different papers and reviews that comprised over 680,000 patients, right? So there's a lot of statistical significance, as we say. So the conditions that they found that you have a higher odds of having if you have alopecia are, number one, vitamin D deficiency. Makes total sense, I'll explain why. Number two, systemic lupus erythematosus, which is another autoimmune problem. Vitiligo, which is autoimmune pigment loss. Metabolic syndrome, which is really more like a pre-diabetes thing, right? Which we'll talk about. And Hashimoto's, which of course is the most common cause of hypothyroidism. So just briefly, let's go through each one of these and why they could be connected and why they matter to you. So vitamin D deficiency. Well, vitamin D deficiency, I almost see that 100% of the time in autoimmune patients in my practice that aren't supplementing. Why? Well, it seems to be part of the genetic package for having an autoimmune problem. And vitamin D is anti-inflammatory and immune system regulatory, so it makes perfect sense that you would have an increased odds for having that if you've got alopecia, which is a autoimmune problem, right? Alopecia areata is an autoimmune problem. Now with systemic lupus and vitiligo and Hashimoto's, why would those be associated? Well, it's because it's kind of like a taboo has been broken. Once you have an autoimmune problem, it means your immune system's ability to tolerate you is broken. And so you can get an expansion of your autoimmune problem. I always tell people, and it's not fun to tell them, but if you've got one autoimmune problem, it's very likely you're going to get another one unless you're very careful and very proactive. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video. A lot of times alopecia areata just kind of gets blown off like, well, I had it when I was 18. Well, maybe, but now you're at increased risk for these other conditions I've talked about, which can be more impacting than alopecia areata and more life-changing. They're just worse, right? We don't need an autoimmune problem where your immune system is attacking you. We don't need that expanding, right? So with metabolic syndrome, that is a kind of a generic name for when you have high triglycerides, your blood sugar's up, you're a little bit obese, and those things are all inflammatory as well. So the connection between those two could be that the autoimmune inflammatory process that's causing alopecia areata is also fueling your insulin resistance, right? And by the same token, insulin resistance is inflammatory, so you get kind of a bidirectional flow there. So if you have alopecia areata, it doesn't matter if you still have it or if you had it 10 years ago, you are at increased risk for these conditions. So I would be on the lookout for these things. In fact, what I would do is I would do some multiple tissue antibody testing to try to see if you've got tissue antibodies right now that are associated with lupus or vitiligo or Hashimoto's, because those antibodies have sort of a predictive power. A lot of these tissue antibodies are present 5, 6, 7, 10 years before you develop the overt disease that everybody recognizes. For example, you can have thyroid antibodies, like thyroid peroxidase antibodies for Hashimoto's, 7, 10 years before you finally get diagnosed with hypothyroidism or before you finally get diagnosed with Hashimoto's. With lupus, you could have phospholipid antibodies or platelet glycoprotein antibodies, which I'm showing you on the screen here. You could have those several years before you have the overt organ damage that someone would go, oh, now you have lupus. So we're talking about being proactive. Okay, so really the big message today is if you've got one autoimmune problem, there's a danger, and I won't say a guarantee, but a real danger you're going to get another one. So if you're suffering with lupus, right, or vitiligo or Hashimoto's, you may have one of these other conditions, right? So it's really critical that you're working with someone that is proactive, right? Someone that's a detective, someone that understands each one of these conditions and understands that to really help someone, in my opinion, the best, you need to be proactive, not wait until things are so bad that you finally get overtly diagnosed with these conditions. Because if those antibodies are there, there's things you can do right now to limit the progression to full-blown overt autoimmune disease, in addition to the alopecia areata, okay? So make sure you're working with someone that understands that concept, someone that lives that concept and understands what tests do we need to order, like multiple tissue antibody testing, comprehensive lymphocyte immunophenotyping, which I'll put on the screen here, which is a way of kind of looking at your immune system. Because even if you've got alopecia and 99 other people have alopecia areata, yes, you all have autoimmune hair loss, but we don't really know what your immune system is doing unless we look at it and kind of get your immune system fingerprint. Because if you just have to know what it is, right? Because if I know that something is high that shouldn't be, then I can do things to decrease it, right? Just really simply. But if I don't know that, I may waste time doing a bunch of other treatments that don't matter. So I like to do that testing. I recommend finding someone who knows how to do that as well. And then someone that knows how to interpret those results and knows what type of treatments to do. And then how do we know if the treatment's even working, right? So with most of these autoimmune cases, of course, the ones that I've seen over the last 20 years, we don't really get excited unless they're doing better after 6 months or 8 months or 9 months, right? That's when you know you've done a really good job. So anyway, I just wanted to alert you to the fact that if you've got alopecia, you're definitely at risk for vitamin D deficiency, lupus, vitiligo, metabolic syndrome, and Hashimoto's. And if you have alopecia areata, you could do things proactively to decrease your risk of that happening, but you got to be working with someone that knows what those things are. So I'll see you next time. Have a good one.